Hi again, welcome back to IndyCar on the 19th of December. So only 2 more days until, well, officially midwinter, I guess, and then on to Christmas. Now, my previous broadcasts, despite my dislike of this format, I've mostly dealt with some bad news, but I want today to have a look at what the potential is for a Scottish Christmas as an independent state, because this is something which we often forget in the midst of all the problems which have been created by Scotland being stuck in this United Kingdom. There is always hope, and one of the possibilities, in fact one of many possibilities which I'd like to start with today, is of course if we are independent we no longer have a £1.5 billion black hole, according to the national press. This is apparently what Scotland has, and if you look at the figures that have been published recently, you'll find that the British total debt is running at something like over £10 trillion, and the amount of money actually spent servicing that debt over the period of 12 months is roughly equivalent of half of the entire budget of both the NHS and the education sector for the entire United Kingdom. So it's an enormous burden which has been placed not only on other people in the United Kingdom but on Scotland as well, having to shoulder supposedly our share of this debt that we have incurred, which we haven't actually incurred at all, but which has apparently been incurred by the United Kingdom government on our behalf for our benefit. That would disappear. If we were independent, there wouldn't be any black hole, because we wouldn't owe anyone any money, because we haven't borrowed any money. And starting afresh with a clean slate means that we also have all of our taxation. And I'm not talking just about income tax here, I'm talking about the taxation on all of our resources, including oil, gas, electricity, everything else that is charged in Scotland, VAT, you name it. All of that revenue, which is currently being divided up and 40% of it is being removed and spent elsewhere in the UK, all of that would come back to Scotland, and that, at the moment, at the least anyway, would give the Scottish Government approximately £100 billion per year to run the country on, far more than we actually need to run the country, and it would enable us to do so many things differently. If we were independent right now and we had access to all of our revenues, there wouldn't be any poverty here, because the Scottish Government, using those revenues, and remember we would be able to sell a lot of our surplus renewable energy, our oil and our gas on the open market for whatever the market price is, and use those profits and put them into a national wealth fund which can be used for the benefit of everyone. And that would include, I think, providing a dignified level of income for every single person in the United Kingdom there, in Scotland, who needs it. So anyone who's unable to work because of sickness or disability, or because they're having to care for somebody, they would be entitled and would receive an income which is more than they need to subsist, and enough to lead a dignified life for as long as they need it. All of which can be paid not just out of taxation, but out of the massive profits that Scotland would make from selling these natural resources on the open market. Now, as well as that, there are other things which would be wonderful for our Christmas. I mean, quite apart from the fact that we could end poverty on a permanent basis, and Scotland could be one of the first countries in the world, in the developed West, which eradicates poverty completely. All that's required is for us to nationalise some of our national resources, those key national resources which make the most money. Imagine, instead of having to pay massive sums of money for your heat, light and power to international corporations which are charging international global rates, if we actually only needed to pay for the cost of producing that energy and supplying it to people, we could be paying far less for our electricity, our heating, our lighting, our road fuel. Everything would be so much cheaper, and whatever we didn't need could then be sold at international market values onto the international market, attracting again more profits to Scotland. So not only would these nationalised utilities, such as what we used to have in the old days, like the electricity board, the gas board, the coal board, those are the things we used to have in the past, if we brought them back, then we would have all that we needed to run our homes at an affordable price all the time, no matter what the weather, no matter what the international global price of commodities might be. They would just cost us what it basically costs to extract them. And that would also create a massive set of nationalised industries in which people could have long-term careers without worrying about the security of their jobs. Now, you might think, well, he's just an old socialist and he's going back down the renationalisation route. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing, and I make absolutely no apology for it. But there has to be a mix. It can't all be nationalised, because in order to make a profit from these internationally needed resources, we need to have an international system for selling those surpluses. And that would be a system whereby we no longer have to pay the UK national grid to supply them with electricity at a higher cost for connection than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. We could demand that if they want their renewable electricity at a more affordable cost, then they have to get rid of these ridiculous price barriers to gain access to connecting to their bit of their national grid. So it gives us a lot more power and a lot more control over just how much we export, how much we charge for it, and what our customers can actually do when it comes to connecting with our power systems. Now, the other thing about this is, as an independent state, we could start to do things more efficiently. For one thing, creating a lot of new industries like this is going to create a lot of jobs, and it's going to attract an awful lot of people to Scotland, and we would need those people. So we would need control over our foreign policy, our borders. We would need to have an open policy for any Europeans wanting to work here, whether or not we rejoined the European Union or not. We could open our borders to that kind of trade, and that can be done just through the European Free Trade Association, or it could be done with an individual deal. It wouldn't really matter, but what would matter is that we have control over who gets into Scotland and who does not. Now, that doesn't mean we were going to shut out anyone who needs help, because we would be able to afford to help people, because we would have enough money to do it. And we'd also have enough jobs for anyone who has been fleeing persecution and who does want to train and work in the Scottish economy to get the training, to find a new job, and to find a valued place in our economy. These are all things which are not just possible, but are highly desirable and necessary in a new state. Now, the other thing that we would do is, obviously, we would lose the national British debt. That is something which was incurred by the English government, not us. And therefore, we've no legal requirement to do anything about repaying any of it, because we never agreed to any of it in the first place. The Acts of Union in 1707 made us, as Scots, responsible for a portion of England's debt. And back in 1921, that was as much as 60% of all of Scotland's revenues, which were flowing into the English bank, basically, to pay for England's debts. Now, thankfully, that's reduced somewhat, a little bit, and we're now only giving over 40% of our revenues to the English government to be disbursed elsewhere inside their shrinking empire. But after we leave it, we have no obligations whatsoever to do that. Although we could choose to help parts of Northern England if we wanted to, by giving them aid and assistance if we wanted to. All of that would be up to us. But the nice thing about imagining Christmas in an independent Scotland is that everybody would be warm, everyone would be safe, everyone would have a house, nobody need be homeless, nobody would be poor, and everyone would have access to training and be able to have a career no matter where they came from. All of this sound like a fantasy? Well, it's only a fantasy if you stay chained to the way the United Kingdom does things. So I think it's worth thinking about Christmas future, but Christmas future based on Scotland being in charge of everything. In opening its own trading embassies, and embassies across the world, in fact, promoting international trade, promoting international diplomacy, allowing Scotland to take part in international affairs and to write its own trading agreements with other countries and other bodies such as the EU. Everything that currently is messed up, misused, mishandled, or just generally not done properly by the English government would no longer be done on our behalf. We wouldn't have to put up with the mistakes, we wouldn't have to put up with the political dogma of Tory free market capitalism. We could have a hybrid
of our own internal domestic requirements being seen to first at the cost of production, and everything else thereafter when it comes to exporting can be done as part of a free market economy and charging full price for every resource that we trade. We could also trade those resources for things that we need as well, things that we may not have, for example steel, perhaps some other metals and other materials that Scotland needs for its new industries. Remember, we could have our own civilian shipbuilding industry on a much larger scale. We could be designing and building low or zero carbon shipping, sail-driven shipping, electrically driven shipping, or a combination of all of those things. That could be done, but it can't be done with the UK, because the UK limits their shipbuilding to just one ferry yard, which is basically on its uppers at the moment and hasn't managed to build the ferries that we needed. But imagine if we had a shipyard which was big enough and was well enough staffed and run to do the job properly. Just think what you could do with that. And then there's the issue of our infrastructure. At the moment, our railway is owned by the British National Railway Network, and it is they who decide what happens with our rail tracks and even the embankments and the trees around our railway tracks, which they recently chopped down without anybody's permission. We wouldn't have to put up with that anymore. Our own railway system would belong to us, and we could develop it. We could put in new branch lines. We could dig more underground systems for our cities. We could do pretty much anything we liked because we'd have the money to invest in doing it. All we would need is our politicians, the ones we currently have leading the country, to start thinking about this and imagining how much better this country could be if they would only man up a little bit and decide to use the next general election, not just to start negotiating with the United Kingdom, but just to simply tell the United Kingdom, once we have that seat majority, that we've had enough, and that's the end of the Union, and we're off on our own. And if you don't like it, well, hard cheese. We'll go and trade with people who do like us. But these are all, at the moment, just potential futures. But these potential futures cannot be reached unless the politicians that we have elected have actually got the backbone to do something about it. As somebody once said, independence is never given, it always has to be taken back. And in our case, we would only be returning Scotland to what it once was, a free and fair society which had existed for over 900 years before the English decided they would invade a few times and threaten us and eventually force us into some kind of forced union. And we've had 300 years to see how that worked out. But I'd like you to imagine just for a moment how much better this country could be. And remember, even if you're a high earner and you're worried about the Scottish Government planning to raise your taxes at the moment, if we were independent, we would have so much of a tax take and so many resources and so many profits flowing in that you wouldn't need to lose any of your income, no matter how wealthy you might be. But those at the bottom would be assured of getting an income which was more than enough for their needs as well. So it is possible to have a hybrid country which operates both nationalised internal economic industries, the ones that we really need, like resources, energy, so electrical, renewable energy, gas, even oil we can use for other things, but we can phase oil out later on. But all of those things would exist first of all as publicly owned resources which would come to us at cost. Anything over and above that we exported would bring in profits which we can invest. This doesn't strike me as a bad idea. The trouble is that governments generally tend to take one of two positions. You're either on the left or you're on the right. Nobody sees how you can combine these two things, where you can have a socialist idea for producing enough energy, food and other absolute essentials for your population at cost, whilst at the same time using the international global capitalist model to sell your surplus resources on the open market to make money to feed your country and to make it wealthier. All of it's possible. Scotland has an embarrassing amount of natural wealth which we can't use because the English government has sold it to private international corporations, so we lose it. And even our own government sold the seabed recently to international corporations, and so most of our seabed and the chances of using it for things like wind energy and tidal energy is probably going to end up being owned by Norway's state energy company Statoil, which is a nationalised industry. So you see where this is going. Anyway, I just thought I should point these things out, that another future is not just possible, but it's so desirable, and it's so much better than what we're putting up with at the moment. I wonder why politicians are not actually talking about it. Anyway, that's my sort of Christmas message for you of Christmas future. Let's not go back to a Victorian Christmas past, which is what's promised by the Tories. And that's where we're heading right now. Everything cut to the bone, the poor getting poorer, the rich getting richer, and the country's basically going to hell in a handcart, and it owes trillions and trillions of pounds. Let's get out from under this, and let's start planning this new future right now. And let's start leaning on our politicians to actually make it possible, so that when we do vote in next year's general election, and the one after that at Holyrood, that we're voting for independence, and we're voting for Holyrood to be our national government with every single power, including foreign policy, defence, everything. That is really what we need. We don't need the English government. We don't need Tory policies. We don't even need Labour policies, which are almost as bad. In fact, they're pretty much interchangeable. What we need is something different, and we need a hybrid economy which is capable of helping our most vulnerable, but without costing the people who are earning the most, because we can actually just make money from our resources. We don't need to start taxing people more, no matter how much they earn. Anyway, that's about it from me and my back of the envelope economic view. But I hope you found this program interesting, and as usual I'll be back later on in the week. If you do want to continue to support the channel, you can do so by making a donation in the link that appears in the description. And hopefully I'll see you in a few days, and I'll certainly have another Christmas message for you before Christmas Eve. That's it from IndyCar today. Keep the faith, and remember, there is a choice here, and it's up to our politicians to give us that choice. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.